Hi, I'm Abby, I have a lot of records, and this is Vinyl Monday. Okay, in advance, sorry for the background noise. My neighbors are clinically insane, and apparently mow their lawns in the rain, which is wildly unsafe. Please do not do that. So welcome back, or welcome if this is your first time here. Vinyl Monday is the who, what, when, where, why, and how do I feel about classic albums in my collection. If 30-minute episodes aren't your thing, don't worry. I also do Vinyl Monday in 60 seconds here on my channel, over on my Instagram, as well as TikTok. Oh, Jesus. Hello! Abby from the future. Here with a big announcement. This Wednesday, April 24th, is the first ever Vinyl Weekday Extended Cinematic Universe crossover event. For those who are unaware, I am not the only Vinyl Weekday series. Almost 2 years ago now, I discovered Vinyl Friday, hosted by Fathom Music, aka Nancy. If you like Vinyl Monday but wish there was more musical analysis, Vinyl Friday is the place to be. Nancy is a musician, skilled at building her own instruments as well as playing them. Her most recent episode of the Revolver series is one of the most in-depth and loving analyses I've ever seen. Nancy and I did a fun little Q&A which will be posted to her channel on Wednesday, which now that I think of it would actually be Tuesday for those of us in the United States. How did we do a Q&A while being on opposite sides of the planet? Subscribe to Fathom to find out. Nancy's channel will be linked in my description. Thank you so much for having me on your show and hosting us hooligans who will surely be populating your comment section. I'll see you lot there, and back to the show. Tomorrow night, as of me posting this, not filming this, I make these wildly in advance, will be April's full moon, colloquially known as the pink moon. It's called such because of wildflowers native to my area of the US. This is phlox, little white, purple, and pink wildflowers that bloom close to the ground. If you have cherry trees, also pink, those might be in bloom now too. To celebrate, I've decided to feature a record that is near and dear to many, named after this moon. This week's album is Nick Drake, Pink Moon. Congrats to those who guessed this one. Remember, if you want to play along, all you gotta do is check out my community tab. That's where I post my hints to what next week's album is gonna be. I host polls where sometimes you get to pick what's on the show. I make announcements when I'm places that aren't here. You can find all of that on my channel. Alright, let's take the plastic off. So my copy is a repress, clearly. Original copies of Pink Moon, or any Nick Drake record for that matter, will cost you a pretty penny. They are collector's items of the collector's items. I've heard there's a remaster from either 2008 or 2009 from Japan that's supposed to be really good. This is just the most recent general sale copy. I bought this off Discogs from Red Scroll Records in Connecticut. I bought a ton of other stuff from them at this record fair in Northampton, Massachusetts. They're pretty good. You should check them out. As an art history girly, I have been dying to feature Pink Moon for this cover art specifically. This is a painting by Michael Trevithick. Nick gave no specifics for the art besides the album title, so Michael basically had free reign. This was only the second album cover he'd ever designed, and this is what he came up with. We of course have the titular moon that looks more orange than pink. With this big leaf up here, it kind of looks like a James and the Giant Peach situation. That's leaving a flaming trail, no less. But to me, the strangest element of all is what appears to be a foot wearing a green ballet shoe. I get the feeling Michael was given an advance copy to listen to while he painted, because a lot of these images, the shoe and the clown, are from Parasite, the broken cup from Things Behind the Sun, and up here, a postcard with lyrics from the title track. When you open up the gatefold, you get the full painting. Overall, this is such a striking cover, and the surreal style is a window into the worlds Nick sang of. Overall, I think it's pretty safe to say Michael was inspired by Rene Magritte. Floating household objects, super smooth shading, giant fruits, gotta be Magritte. This photo is said to be of Nick's music room. Check out what's hanging on the wall! After Nick's passing, the original Pink Moon painting made its way back to Island Records HQ, where it sat in the basement. One of the central characters of our story today, Island press officer David Sanderson, found it, hung it in his office for a while, then gave it to Nick's sister Gabrielle. I'm pretty sure she still has it today. It's hard to believe such a unique and captivating cover was Plan B. Plan A was a photo shoot with Keith Morris. He'd photographed Nick for 5 Leaves Left, so Nick was comfortable with him. But after looking over the keepers and feeling there wasn't anything usable, creative director Annie Sullivan called Michael up, and I'm so glad she did. There is no other album cover quite like Pink Moon. I would have loved to see this shot used for something, maybe a printed inner sleeve with a black or white border. Instead, my copy uses a negative colorway of this shot in the inside gatefold, along with all of Nick's lyrics. Now, this is the shortest the personnel section will ever be, because Nick Drake did, well, everything. All lyrics, compositions, vocals, guitar, and piano are by him. Pink Moon was produced and engineered by John Wood. Roll transition. Our story today begins not with Nick Drake, but with Joe Boyd. Yes, the same Joe Boyd who owned the UFO Club where Pink Floyd got their start. He was one of Nick's greatest champions. But in 1970, Joe sold Witch Season Productions off to Island Records and moved to LA. He wanted to shift gears from eccentric psych rockers and folkies to working in film. But it was written into the sales contract that Island was required to move forward with Joe's acts. According to David Sanderson, Joe said, quote, "Look after everybody, but especially Nick. Nick is to be persevered with." When this sale went through, Nick's second record, Brighter Later, was already in the can. Neither Joe nor Nick understood why his first record, 5 Leaves Later, underperformed. So they made a big bid for radio play with the next one, employing a small army of session musicians, including VU alum John Cale and Apple Records act Doris Troy. Why did they have to put all of their eggs in the radio basket? Because Nick was very introverted. Quote, "The most introverted person she ever met," according to Beverly Martin. His peers and label mates built their careers on homegrown local followings and college kid crowds, but Nick wasn't much for self-promotion, and aside from a brief stint in a band early in his career, he didn't gig. Management tried to send him on tour in the past, but it was a mess, and in 1970, Nick played his last ever gig. 1971 was a weird year for him. Brighter Later wasn't the success Joe, Island, or Nick hoped it'd be. The fleshed out compositions did the opposite of what they were supposed to. They made the record difficult to market. So Nick decided he'd go in the exact opposite direction for the follow-up. No guest musicians, no guest producers, just him. Meanwhile, having such confidence in his work but no validation made the depression he struggled through his entire adult life flare up. After the failure of Brighter Later, weekly label payments of $20 weren't enough to keep Nick afloat. He couch surfed with buddies for a while before his parents stepped in. He was ashamed of having to move back home, saying he, quote, "couldn't bear it at home, but he couldn't bear it anywhere else." Now, Nick's family was well off enough to take him in and give him access to necessary treatment, but attitudes towards mental health, therapy, and medication weren't as open in the 70s as they are now. He would get to thinking his meds stifled his creativity, so he would stop taking them, but when he was off his meds, he spiraled and became too depressed to write. So he'd start taking his meds again and on, go off them again. It was a vicious cycle. Amidst this strange time in his life, Nick wrote what would become Pink Moon. Sessions took place on October 30th and 31st, yes, Cabbage Night and Halloween, at Sound Technique Studio in London, where he'd recorded Brighter Later and 5 Leaves Left. It may seem unlikely Nick could fly under his own label's radar, but you have to understand how record deals worked in the late 60s and 70s. Artists did have access to the label's studios, but they'd have to pay out of pocket for studio time. Plus, Nick had what I call a barn cat personality. He'd drop by unannounced, stay for a while, not doing or saying much of anything, then leave for a long time before turning up out of the blue again. He did that both with his friends and with his employers. Thus, Island had no idea Nick cut Pink Moon until he dropped off the masters at HQ. Here's a quote from David in the Pink Moon press release about the situation. Quote, "A week or so ago, he came in, smiling that weird little smile, half mocking, half bewildered, and handed over this, his new album. He'd just gone into the studios and recorded it without telling a soul except the engineer. And we haven't seen him since." The track listing of Pink Moon goes as follows. Opening up side 1, we have the title track Pink Moon, followed by Place to Be. Next, Road, then Which Will, followed by the instrumental Horn, and side 1 closes with Things Behind the Sun. Opening up side 2, we have No, followed by Parasite, then Free Ride, next Harvest Breed, and the album closes with From the Morning. Pink Moon was released February of 1972 to, well, nothing. As far as sales went, at least. John Wood was baffled. They'd made a simple, timeless body of work like Leonard Cohen or Bob Dylan. It could have and should have succeeded anywhere, especially in the States. Island took a huge gamble in selecting Pink Moon as the first of Nick's works to be released here. Island was at a loss. They were convinced Pink Moon could be a hit if only Nick were willing to promote it, but after the disaster of his tour, he couldn't bring himself to do it. Instead, the label took out full-page ads in publications like Melody Maker, with a positive quote from Stephen Holden's review in Rolling Stone, and just hoped for the best. Nick only accepted one sit-down interview ever, and it was to promote Pink Moon. It was conducted by Jerry Gilbert of Sounds. Jerry was a fan who'd given Brighter Later positive marks, but Nick was so stiff and awkward that he bombed what should have been a softball. Some sources will tell you that Pink Moon went entirely unnoticed, but it didn't. It was reviewed by major music publications like Melody Maker and Cream. Wikipedia boils the latter review down to, quote, "not awfully good, but I'm subscribed to Cream and have access to the print archives, so here's what Coleman Andrews really had to say." Quote, "The longer songs do less with more words. They're not awfully good, most of them. There's a lulling repetitiousness to a lot of what he sings. But no matter. That's the point, in fact. His music is a triumph of style over sententiousness, of sound over sense. It's not what he sings, or even for that matter how he sings. It's that he sings at all, that he opens us up to this world at all. Though the language is off-putting, yes, Coleman's basically saying Nick being a sports lyricist and phenomenal guitarist instead of fluffy and pretentious like other folk artists worked in Pink Moon's favor. That being said, this is a comically lukewarm review. Quote, "He never fails, and he never really flashes." Coleman gives exactly as much praise as he does little swipes that he thinks are oh so clever. See this example. Quote, "It's seductive music. The voice is deep, firm, covert, and binding. He very nearly croons, 'God save us.'" Insert useless tangent about Robert Plant here. He very nearly croons with his enigmatic, endearingly weak little songs, and always with the smirk of the all-seeing eye. But he makes up for all that with a closing line that's right on the money. Quote, "He knows more about us than we know about him. In a way, the Cream review reflects the spectacular cognitive dissonance Nick felt at the end of his career. You had Joe Boyd and the Cats at Island who really truly believed in him, then the audiences who just didn't respond, the critics who couldn't grasp what they were hearing, and sensitive, withdrawn Nick, who at this point had no idea what to believe and very little faith in himself. He didn't want to be famous, but he wanted his work to be heard and make a difference for people. This dissonance tore him apart. In the years following Pink Moon, Nick's already fragile mental health was on a steady decline. He was physically there, just not present. He was in good enough spirits in '73 to get a job programming computers and even write some more material. But he quit that job and spiraled again after failing to deliver in the studio. By his last session, a once formidable guitarist was too weak and skittish to sing and play at the same time. By his producer's account, it was painful to watch. Hearing about the twilight of his life, it comes into focus that Nick Drake's worst enemy was Nick Drake. In November of '74, Nick overdosed on his medication. He was just 26 years old with a career that lasted all of 4 years. Pink Moon was Nick's last complete artistic statement. Gabrielle, his sister, doesn't believe his death was an accident or premeditated. She described it as an impulse. Nick's legacy is incredible, and despite what the popular narrative might have you believe, his influence was pretty immediate. Songwriter Robin Frederick had a crush on Nick and wrote Sandy Gray for him, which John Martin then recorded. Nick and John met a year later via Paul Wheeler, and they formed somewhat of a bromance. John looked up to Nick. No, not just literally, but he was very tall. The title track of the record, Solid Air, is about Nick. John's whole style on this one is a love letter to Nick. A lot of sources cite the Fruit Tree box set as an instrumental release in building Nick's following, and it was. That's how Robert Smith of The Cure, Kate Bush heard of Nick. Elliott Smith cited him as an influence as well. I haven't seen as much about the Way to Blue comp. It brought a 1.5 wave of new fans, including a familiar face to this channel. After critics savaged their 1993 release, Slowdive was set adrift. Their label basically said, "Fuck them kids," backing out on paying for the US tour, and shoegaze as it was thoroughly out of fashion. Frontman Neil Halstead first turns his attention to ambient music, which thoroughly informed the last record of Slowdive's original run. Around the time the band dissolved, Way to Blue came out. Cue the next 30 years of Neil's career. He completely overhauled his sound and the way he wrote. You can hear hints of Nick on Mojave 3, Excuses for Travelers especially, but where you really hear him is on Neil's solo records, the lo-fi crunchy Sleeping on Roads, and Palindrome Hunches. When I tell you, I have been waiting to plug this record on the series somehow. It's timeless folksy goodness. If you haven't heard it, what the fuck? Go change that! The second wave of Nick fans came in 1999. VW commissioned Arnold Advertising to create an ad for the Cabrio. Or Cabrio, I wouldn't know. This is a car from the year I was born. It was originally titled Milky Way, as it was supposed to use the song Under the Milky Way by Church, but someone in the office brought in a record from their personal collection. Pink Moon. The ad was reworked at the last minute, was a smash hit, cue a rush of interest in Nick. Dealerships were getting calls not about the car, but about the song in the commercial. In response, Pink Moon was reissued. At the time of his passing, Nick only sold a cumulative 4,000 copies of all 3 of his albums. By the end of the year 2000, Pink Moon sold 74,000 copies alone. Since then, Nick's music has appeared on the soundtracks of Garden State, The Royal Tenenbaums, This Is Us, and Oh my god. Ladies, gentlemen, and cretins of caves, young Sheldon has entered the Vinyl Monday Extended Cinematic Universe. And in 2023, Rolling Stone named Pink Moon number 203 on their 500 greatest albums list. I want to round out this chapter of the video with a quote from Joe Boyd, which he gave to Rolling Stone amidst the whole VW commercial thing. I feel it's a summary of where we've been and a good transition to where we're headed. Quote, "I love things reaching out of the past and slightly diluting our headlong rush into the future. In a way, maybe the fact that Nick wasn't popular at the time made him not of the time." So, what do I think of Pink Moon? Going in, Nick's work was a casual companion of mine throughout my college years. If my Spotify is any indication, I would have first stumbled upon his work and liked most of Pink Moon in the wake of the worst breakup ever. Makes sense. But like Nick himself, his music barn-catted me. Popped in, stayed a while, then quickly left without me noticing, before returning unannounced almost 5 years later. Studying Pink Moon this past week has completely changed my relationship with Nick and his work. In the beginning, I hadn't yet cried because he left our world too soon. If anything, I appreciated him from afar. I appreciated him being such a pure artist, and it hurt to know a creator like him gave so much and saw so little in return. Then I watched A Skin Too Few for the first time. I looked in his eyes, and I don't know what came over me. I was a blubbering, soggy mess on my couch. Seeing how he resembled his mother, how he sounded like her too, hearing his sister call him Nicky really didn't help. Nick wasn't just some artist who lived and died decades before I was born, and he wasn't some tortured artist, as a popular video essay on this platform would have you believe. Nick was a loved son and brother, a friend to many, even if those friends didn't meet until his funeral. He wasn't some mythical creature. He wasn't the Van Gogh of anything. He was a multifaceted, real guy. Here's a quote from the Pink Moon press release that dispels the myth that his label didn't believe in him. Quote, "We believe that Nick is a great talent. His first 2 albums haven't sold a shit, but if we carry on releasing them, maybe one day someone in authority will stop to listen to them properly and agree with us, and maybe a lot more people will get to hear Nick Drake's incredible songs and guitar playing, and maybe they'll buy a lot of records and fulfill our faith in Nick's promise. Then we'll have done our job." I don't think it's intentional, but those who call Pink Moon one of the saddest albums ever made apply the end of Nick's life to his work, and that robs him of his legacy. This is how I imagine him. With this review, I want to show you that Pink Moon, and in turn its creator, are multifaceted. You don't get that from the first listen. Like Joe Boyd said, you have to persevere with this guy. Sit down and really listen to what this guy has to say. Getting active listening in this week was hard because Nick is such good nothing music. Before you freak out over that wording, nothing music is not empty music. It's just music that you don't have to laser focus on to celebrate. It can soundtrack your everyday life. The best example, bossa nova. But somewhere along the line, when you buckle down and actively listen a time or 5, you get sucked into Nick's beautiful world. It happened to me. To begin with, the album title. For the life of me, I do not know why I don't do this more. I loved doing it with Harvest, so we're fixing it here. What is the Pink Moon? It's usually the first full moon after the spring equinox. Spring equinox marks the beginning of the light half of the year, a time of rebirth and renewal after months of cold and darkness. After a weird and bad year in Nick's life, a dark season with a lot of upheaval, Pink Moon very well have been his way of trying to pull himself out of the dark and into the light half of living. Pink Moon is on its way. None of you stand so tall. Pink Moon is gonna get ye all. Whatever the Pink Moon represents, in this interpretation, the procession of time, It's inescapable. In meaning and sound, the title track sets the tone for the rest of the album. For those who find peace in stargazing, that's the mood of Pink Moon. But it's also a major deviation from the rest. After 2 minutes with sparse, tiptoeing piano, from here on out, it's just a man hunched over his guitar. These chords sparkle, and Nick sings to us in unbelievably hushed tones. He sings below his register on the pseudo-chorus. I can almost see what Coleman was trying to say when he said Nick very nearly croons. We have gorgeous glistening strums on Place to Be, a song about coming of age and grappling with all that comes with it. Like not being as optimistic or open as you were before. Now I'm weaker than the palest blue, oh so weak in this need for you. It can be scary to be vulnerable. This is where I noticed the latent surface noise present throughout Pink Moon. It gives sometimes vacuous stuff a homey feel. Road is our first display of Nick's one-of-a-kind finger-picking style. The rolling, tumbling melody, somehow playing lead and rhythm at the same time, gets stuck in my head just as much as the vocal does. Nick's style is classical, but with some key edits. Skip ahead by like 30 seconds if you don't want the magic of his playing ruined forever. While we're still not totally sure what guitar he played on Pink Moon, it's pretty well known amongst fan circles that Nick strung all his guitars with nickel strings and played them until they were black. Dead ass strings. That's how we get those warm tones. He kept his thumbnail long, medium length on the rest. The one thing that throws me is my guitar correspondent this week, Trevin of Humble Fish, best blues band in Florida, says there's not a lot of low end in the guitar tone. Then what is Road? The lyrics are clever, giving the listener a knowing nod and wink. You can say the sun is shining if you really want it to. I can see the moon and it seems so clear. You can take the road that'll take you to the stars. Now I can take a road that'll see me through. Which will is so underrated. For one, the guitar part is gorgeous. I've used this term a lot on the channel, so forgive me for using it again. But in Italian Renaissance art, there's this thing called chiaroscuro. Light and shade. The Witch Will guitar is just that, a blend of warm, earthy low tones and tinny glittering highs. Nick asks us in his thin, feather-light voice to look within ourselves and consider not just things and people we chase, but why. Being a hopeless dreamer and someone who routinely chases the unattainable, whether that's people or material things, I do feel called out in this moment. Horn is one of the most beautiful things I've heard ever. I did my first listen through of this record while photographing the Live Through This thumbnail, which is just such a chaos combination. When Horn came on, I dropped everything, stood there in silence, listened, and replayed it. It is very rare that I stop a listen through, even less common that I replay something. To my memory, I've only had this reaction one other time, 4 and 20 off Deja Vu. Horn doesn't have words, so all the feeling is in these few deliberately chosen notes. Not unlike a horn solo. It could just as easily soundtrack your world crashing down as it could the sweetest, most comforting things. It's barren and tender. Utter devastation after the storm, and the dew on the grass. And that last note is just such a gut punch, like the resolution was an afterthought. Things Behind the Sun is somewhat impenetrable in both intricate playing, perhaps my favorite here, and loaded content. Nick warns us not to cast judgment on society's downtrodden. Life is pretty unpredictable. Everything is temporary. It really doesn't take much for one to lose everything. Furthermore, you never know who's struggling behind their sunny exterior. This is one of those songs that's especially connected to Nick's circumstances. He wasn't afraid to play around with song structure. Things Behind the Sun's coda is unstable, anxious in feeling, but leaves the door open for us to return. Like Odyssey last week, Pink Moon is a heavyweight collection of lightweight tunes. What I mean by that is none of these songs are over 4 minutes long. This thing makes a short runtime, 28 minutes of music, music and maximizes it to brilliant effect. This is easy when you're a sparse writer like Nick. Saying the most in the least amount of words is a rare and remarkable skill, which he exacts with knife-sharp precision on Road. You know that I love you, you know I don't care. You know that I see you, you know I'm not there. Way to beckon with one hand and shoo with the other. He validates our adoration, then casts us aside just as soon. The opening line of Parasite is a goosebumps moment. When lifting the mask from a local clown, feeling down like him, seeing the light in a station bar, and traveling far in sin. And it doesn't let up. This is some of Nick's greatest lyricism, equal parts real-life observations and swirling dreamlike scenes of sad clowns, jesters, and drifters, those who put on a mask and in reality are at their lowest. Parasites feed off life. This is a song about those who keep themselves occupied with worldly things to fill a void, that which Nick cannot bring himself to do. Our narrator floats around these establishments, utterly detached. I hate to say it, but Free Ride and Harvest Breed is where the fatigue kicks in. This sound has been explored at great length over the past 20-something minutes. After Parasite wrecked our comfy, cozy illusion, we can't just go back to how things were before. Which is such a shame, because Free Ride is ultra charming. Nick puts a second syllable in the word ride, in a sing-songy way. After a somewhat bumpy ride, we're swept back up in cozy, loving arms for From the Morning. It's earthy and gentle like the smell of rain, and the most joyful track here. The day once dawned and it was beautiful, acknowledges the happiness of the past, then finds solace in the dark times. Then night fell and the air was beautiful. The chorus, so look, see the days, the endless colored ways, encourages us to find beauty in all seasons of life. Look, see the sights, the endless summer nights, urges us to live in the moment. And hope for the future is hinted at in the all-time great line, "And now we rise, and we are everywhere." It's not the last line in the song, but that connection to all that surrounds us is where I want to end things. One last thing before I close this episode out. While I was writing this, we got 2 days of unseasonably warm weather because I live in New England, and the maximum allowed good days we have in a week is apparently 2. It was nice enough where I could sleep with an open window and wake up to the sweet smell of fresh air. It was colder than I thought it would be, so I woke up freezing before all of my alarms. It was quiet, it was cool, I'm surrounded by the scent I wish I could bottle because I can't bear the thought of never smelling it again, and the first thought my morning brain had was, I have to listen to Nick. I have to listen to Northern Sky. I know it wasn't a cut off Pink Moon, but I promise those followed. The point is, I didn't do anything but prop myself up and listen. No scrolling, no texting anybody, just me, the morning streaming in through my window, and Nick, who is so wildly different from the music I gravitate towards in my everyday life. He forces me to stop and listen. Not just to him, but to the world around us. That's what Pink Moon is. An observant, insightful, quaint, but no less powerful, singular, gorgeous album. That, yes, carries a lot of sadness in the lyrics, but there's cleverness too, and there's joy. There's beauty in all seasons, comfort in darkness, anxiety in the light. Where there is temporality, and where there is beauty in simply being alive, Nick Drake is there. My personal favorites off this one are Pink Moon, Witch Will, Horn, Parasite, and From the Morning. Remember, if you want to keep up with all of my favorites from all the Vinyl Mondays, I have a Spotify playlist linked in my description. I update it every week. And that's it! That is Pink Moon to celebrate the Pink Moon. What do you think of Pink Moon? What do you think of Nick Drake? Leave a comment letting me know. I love hearing what you guys have to say about albums that I love. And remember, despite what some guy on the internet has to say, your opinion matters. If you like what I do here, you should like this video and subscribe to my channel. I post new episodes of Vinyl Monday every Monday morning at 11. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next week. Bye!